Hello, welcome to Workplace Wake Up. I'm Jen Shaw. Every week, I spend about 15 minutes covering key legal developments, introducing you to interesting guests, and providing some entertainment to start your workday. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for the podcast today. We have a very special guest, Melissa Whitehead. Mel, how are you today?
I am doing great. Happy to be here. Thanks.
Well, thanks for coming. Mel, as many of you know, is one of our advice and counsel attorneys and investigators and trainers in the firm. She's the Jill of all trades. And we're here to talk to you today about performance management. Now, Mel, why are we calling this new performance management? Because, I'm sure some people saw the title and thought, okay, what's so new about performance management?
Yeah. And, I say this all the time that it's a new workforce. It is fascinating to me in a employment law nerd kind of way, how different the workforce is now than it used to be. It used to be that if you just essentially paid your employees well and promoted them along, you'd have a lifelong employee, and that's just not the case anymore. It's a whole different work culture of employees, and it requires a new type of performance management.
That is so interesting because I think a lot of folks believe this all came out of COVID, but we saw it even before COVID, right? This idea that the sort of old way of doing performance evaluations is, well, you do them when you can. You're not necessarily held to a schedule, even though, of course, we hold our employees to a schedule. And we give everybody these numbers. And of course, some people are hard graders and some people are easier graders. So the numbers don't really mean much. We don't require people to use comments because that takes a lot of time. So we just haven't invested that much, right? I mean, for me, that's one of the things I really see is that leadership is so darn busy that they're thinking, okay, to do a really good job at performance evaluations takes me so much time, I just can't do it. Why should they do it anyway?
Well, and I also think people, in addition to being overwhelmed, they want to avoid the uncomfortable conversations, right? They don't want to have those uncomfortable, which I relate to. I am people pleaser extraordinaire. I get it. But what I found back when I used to do litigation was that comes at a costly price, that people are learning expensive lessons. I've been asked before, what are some of the most common mistakes I see employers make? And the number one I always say is either not doing performance evaluations or doing dishonest ones. Because what happens is you then later terminate or discipline an employee for poor performance. And the employee understandably says, well, wait a minute, what do you mean? I just got all 5 out of 5 on my review 2 months ago. How can you now be terminating me for poor performance? And you don't have a good explanation for that other than I didn't want to have that conversation with you. I was overwhelmed. And as you always say, Jen, that employee then says, well, it can't really be my performance. So what's the real reason? Let me think about it. Is it the workers' comp claim I just filed? Is it my sexual orientation or those types of things? And that's where you get yourself into a whole mess.
That is so true. And you made so many important points there, Melissa. I think there is really a movement. There has been where folks have said performance evaluations aren't worth doing. And what I always think is, well, those folks haven't been sued because the performance evaluation is a contemporaneous documentation of that individual's overall performance at the moment. So if you want to try to show, no, I wasn't picking on the employee, I wasn't targeting them for an inappropriate reason, I wasn't doing anything wrong, look at the review that they got, look at what happened here. It can be so useful. But I really think that employers were sort of looking for an easy way out. And like you said, I don't blame them one bit. Let's just not do it. If we can't devote all this time and energy, let's not do it. Well, I hope you can see that without doing a performance review, you do have some risk in litigation. But the other thing is people want to know how they're doing. When we record these podcasts, every time I record one, I say to John, the engineer, how did that go? Was it okay? What should I do better next time? You and I talk about that all the time, Melissa, about trainings and conversations we have with clients and emails we write to clients. We all want to do our best. And if we're never getting feedback, we either make a movie that the company doesn't love us, the employer doesn't like us, so we should go somewhere else, or we make a movie that they're targeting us somehow and they just don't want to give us feedback because there's something wrong with us. So we've got to figure out a way to do it. So if you're going to give an employer practical advice, Melissa, they've never had a performance management program or they've never had an effective one that they like. What do they need to do? What are we recommending to them in terms of how to stand up a performance management program and how to make it actually helpful and worthwhile in the workplace?
Sure. Well, I think, first of all, just maybe speaking from my own experience, but you got to schedule them, right? You can't just try to fit them in when you think they should happen because you're busy. And if you're like me, if it's not on your calendar, it won't happen. So schedule them in a way that makes sense. Either you're doing everyone's annually in January, or you're doing everyone's on the anniversary of when they were hired. Those are the two easiest ways to track. There's pros and cons for both approaches. I mean, administratively, if you do the anniversary, you're not doing, if you've got like 1,000 employees, you're not doing 1,000 evaluations in January, right? But schedule them and stick to the schedule. Hold the supervisors accountable for sticking to the schedule. Have sort of some set standards and templates for your supervisors and managers to use. But as you pointed out, Jen, make sure you have a comment section and that they need to be putting comments in, because if you do include a number rating schedule, that's fairly subjective, even though it's meant to be the objective criteria. And encourage folks to be honest with it. Have those conversations, because you're absolutely right that employees want to know how to improve. They want to know what they're doing well. Include the good and the bad. And, one of the things that I know, Jen, you and I both talk about as a practical tip to make this a little bit easier for the supervisors throughout the year in between, have a separate file, a working file that's not your personnel file, that you're just dragging and dropping. You get an email complimenting an employee or a challenge or a missed deadline, the good and the bad, just drag and drop. And then when it's time to fill out your annual evaluation, you've got this folder you can open up, which leads to my next tip, which would be specific on those evaluations. Sometimes I see them and they're so generalized that I think, how could an employee ever know what you were asking them to work on based on this? It could be, don't just say you have a poor attitude. Say, well, you roll your eyes when I speak in meetings. Give specific examples of what they're doing, both good and bad. That's a bad one. But and having that working file will help you do that. And those are some of the initial ones that come to my mind, Jen, in terms of just some practical things to make the whole process less daunting.
I love that. The other thing that I have found really useful in our firm, and I think a lot of our clients have as well, is that 180-degree review and the self-evaluation, right? So asking employees to tell you, how do they think they did? Because that always gives you a gut check of, okay, are you being too hard? Are you being too easy? Are they being too hard? And then also, how are you doing as the leader? And, it's always scary. You and I talk about this a lot, Melissa, when we have reviews from training. We sort of peek at them with one eye and hope everything's okay. And we both get great reviews, but it's one of those things where you care about what those ratings are. So I understand management and leadership sort of saying, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to get that kind of feedback. I already know what my opportunity areas are, and I can work on that, and I don't need to know. But I find that when I get that feedback about what I'm doing that may be interfering or may be problematic or may be helpful, I want to know. If it's helpful, I want to keep doing it. And if it's not helpful, I don't want to do it. So I think not making that process so static where you only are evaluating in a one-way direction is a really important part of that. And obviously you have to give good parameters about how to do the self-evaluation and how you want them to do the 180. But I feel like that's really helpful. The other thing I want to ask you about while I'm thinking about it, I just thought of this, are suggestion boxes. Now I know we all have so many computer tools these days, and half the time we're on Teams or Zoom or whatever. But I love the idea of having an anonymous way for people to give us feedback in the workplace. And I know that's not a strict performance evaluation, but I think it's related. What do you think about that idea?
I completely agree. And I think it's not completely related to performance management, but like you said, it ties into that idea of the 180, performance management, because again, going back to what I said at the beginning about this brand new workforce, I have clients asking me all the time when I get on my soapbox about this new workforce, and they say, well, how do I know what's going to make employees loyal? How do I know what's going to make them know that we value them if it's not just literally a paycheck? And I often say, well, what you should do is you should ask your employees. You should ask your employees what will make them feel valued. And I think a suggestion box is a great way to sort of get a feel for those kinds of things. Because, the other thing is, everybody, and I'm sure, Jen, you and I have even talked about this, people are having such a hard time finding good people to hire across all kinds of industries. So your best use of your resources is doing what you can to keep your current employees, right? So I agree. I say take those suggestions, and neither of us are saying every single suggestion that goes in the box is going to be a good one that you have to take to heart. But I love the idea of giving employees the opportunity at any time, not just during their evaluation, to speak up and make suggestions. I think that's a great idea.
Totally on the same page as you, Melissa. Now let's talk about how a meeting should actually go in an evaluation, because one of the things that I find sort of humorous, I guess, but it's not funny, are these folks who want to just send an email to the employee like, here's your evaluation. I met my deadline. If you want to talk about it, let me know. Well, this should be something that is really thought through. Just like you said, you have to schedule it. If it's not on your calendar, it didn't happen or it's not going to happen. You've got to have the time to talk to these folks about your perspectives. And I think it's just like a good job interview. You should probably be doing less of the talking than the employee, because you've already written down your thoughts on the evaluation. Now, granted, if you do a 180 or a self-evaluation, they've given you feedback too. But I feel like it's really a good opportunity for the employee to say what they think, for them to ask for new training they want or something else that's on their list that they think would be useful. So those meetings are really important. Have you seen a meeting like that go really wrong, Melissa? And I know, nobody knows that we don't prepare for these podcasts. Oh, wait, I'm going to tell you something funny. So yesterday I was at a conference and somebody said to me, your podcast is my second favorite podcast. Ooh. And I said, oh, wow, that's great. What's your first favorite podcast? Well, you can't even touch it. And I said, okay, what is it? Okay, something called New Heights. It's something about basketball and not basketball, I'm sorry, football. Taylor Swift's boyfriend does it with his brother. So anyway, yeah. So we're not as good, evidently, as New Heights, and maybe we need to do more in that area. But my point is, I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you think of an example where maybe one of these meetings has gone drastically wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly can quickly think of examples where they've been just meaningless, basically, a waste of everyone's time, right? And it's a personal example. It's the easiest one to think of. And it was not at this firm. It was not working for Jen. I will be crystal clear on that. But at a job I had long ago, many employers ago, it was a law firm, and they had this policy of, and it was a nationwide firm. And so the people who ended up doing your reviews didn't even work with you. So you had no, they sort of read some things you had done, but they couldn't give you any feedback. They couldn't answer any questions. And they had this weird policy that there always had to be a second person in the room. And it was often somebody you had never met. And it just made it really impersonal, really not collaborative, which, to your point, Jen, I agree that these should be meetings in person. So it should be viewed as a collaboration. What tools do you need? What can we do to help you? What's your feedback? What can I do better for you? I will toot Jen's horn. Jen is great about that in reviews. She always asks what she could be doing better to support us. And so I have had those meetings where they're just meaningless because the person you're talking to doesn't even know you, or your work, more importantly.
I remember one of my first reviews I got as a new lawyer. The firm had given everyone, I guess, sort of a checklist to ask questions about each associate. And so the person who was delivering my review had some comments, and I was trying to ask about those comments. And he was clearly busy and got irritated and was like, well, okay, I just don't know, but these are the comments, so you should take them to heart. And I thought, well, how can I take them to heart when I don't even understand them? I don't know, what does this relate to? What project are we talking about? What could I have done better? I also think, although I rarely give my ex-husband any credit, I will say that he had a job as an engineer one time, and he kept asking for a review, and they didn't give it to him because they said they were too busy, and he eventually quit. And when he quit, the president of the company came to him and said, hey, I don't understand. Why are you quitting? I thought you were happy. And he said, you won't even give me a review. You clearly don't value me. And I thought, oh, wow. Oh, I kind of get that. Like he just felt like he was a cog on the wheel and it didn't matter. So there's so many reasons to do this. Melissa, we're coming to the end of our time. Thank you so much for working with me on this one today. I always love to get your perspectives.
Sure, it's my pleasure. This is a fun topic. I could talk for hours about this, but nobody else but you and I would listen. So
this is the problem, right? Oh my gosh. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining Melissa and me today. We love doing this podcast with you. If there's anything we can do better or anything you'd like us to do differently, please reach out, jshaw@shawlawgroup.com or info@shawlawgroup.com. Go out and make it a great day, everyone. Thanks so much. Workplace Wake Up, including our guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to spread the word, please share it with others, post about it on social media, and/or rate and review it. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and email us at info@shawlawgroup.com.